Hello, my dear friends. Today we are going to learn some of the most atmospheric and poignant German memoirs about the Sixth Army's defeat that I've read so far. We will listen to the remarkable story of the German officer Friedrich Wilhelm Klemm, who escaped from Stalingrad only minutes before the Red Army stormed the airfield. But before we begin, I would like to thank the sponsor of this video, Conflict of Nations. Conflict of Nations is a free online PvP strategy game set in the modern world. A beautiful isometric map of the world, which depicts more than 100 existing countries ready to be conquered, will feed your aggressive spirit. To start, you need to choose a real country that will lead a modern global war. This will require a deep level of strategic planning and complex tactical execution. After all, in addition to epic battles, you need to take into account logistics, economics, the development of science and infrastructure, as well as the morale of your country's population. The cross-platform feature of the game will make your task much easier, because you can play on both your PC and your mobile phone under one account. By following the link in the description of the video, you will receive an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is valid only for 30 days. Don't waste time. And now, let's begin. I was born on February 4, 1914. Until March 1942, I was the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 267th Infantry Regiment of the 94th Infantry Division. I was recommended for enrollment in the General Staff Courses and became an adjutant to the officer of the Operational Command of the 94th Infantry Division. After the division was dissolved, I was in the rank of captain attached to the artillery group at Stalingrad. On January 17, 1943, I was seriously wounded during one of the attacks. I buried myself in a dugout and spent a week like that without food, and the temperature was -25. The freezing steppe wind was blowing over the neighborhoods of Stalingrad. It threw the dry snow into the empty human faces of the men who no longer had the appearance of people. It was the morning of January 23, 1943. The mighty German army was struggling in agony. There was no salvation left for the crowds of wandering around, thin and debilitated soldiers. A few hours before, I was one of this desperate crowd, sentenced to defeat. Then, the Army Quartermaster, Lieutenant Colonel Werner von Kunowski, had found me in an abandoned dugout. I was in a fever due to my wound. He shook me up and brought me to the headquarters of the 6th Army. There I got my permission to leave and orders to arrive at the last auxiliary airfield in the southwest corner of Stalingrad. It was 4 hours of struggling through knee-deep snow on 2 hands and 1 healthy leg to make my way to my goal. The wound on the upper part of my right thigh caused me intense pain with each step. Move, forward, forward, my remnants of will told me, but my exhausted body refused to move anymore. It was all the consequences of months of living on a piece of bread a day, because in the last few days the provision had been cut off at all. In addition to this, there was the moral oppression of this first awful defeat of our forces. I was lying there, completely buried under a small snowdrift, and wiping the snow off my face with the sleeve of my tattered overcoat. Was it worth all this effort? The Russians would have finished me off with the rifle butt. They needed only sound prisoners for their plants and mines. That morning, the Army Chief of Staff, General Arthur Schmidt, warned me off my gloomy plans. "Just try to make it to the airfield," he said while signing my permission to leave. "The seriously wounded men are still being transported out. There's always plenty of time to catch your death." And so I crawled forward. Perhaps there might still be a chance of escape from this huge piece of land turned by mankind and nature into a cauldron of hell. But how endless could this path be for a man who crawled along it like a snake? What was the black crowd there on the horizon? Was it an airfield, or was it merely a mirage made by an overexcited, frantic state of mind? I braced myself, made it another 3 or 4 meters, and then pulled over to take a pause. Don't lie down, or I would end up like the people I just crawled by. All they wanted, too, was just a short break during their hopeless march to Stalingrad. But their exhaustion was above their strength, and the cruel cold ensured that they never woke up. You could almost envy them. They suffered no more pain or anxiety. I reached the airfield after about an hour. The wounded men were sitting and standing close to each other, breathing hard. I made it to the center of the field. I climbed onto a pile of snow. The blizzard had subsided. I looked along the road behind the airstrip. It led back to Stalingrad. The separate figures of people were dragging themselves towards the outskirts with great effort. There, in the gaping ruins of this so-called city, they looked for shelter from the frost and wind. It seemed that masses of soldiers took this road, but hundreds could not do so. Their stiffened bodies looked like pillars along this terrifying road of retreat. The Russians could have taken this territory a long time ago, but they were prudent and passed only a designated distance per day. What reason did they have to hurry up? There was no one else who could beat them. Like a giant shepherd, they drove these defeated men from all sides towards the city. The few who were still perhaps flying around in the Luftwaffe planes didn't count. It seemed the Russians gave them to us as a gift. They knew that everyone around here was seriously wounded. Besides me, there were 2 men lying on a ground sheet. One had a stomach wound, and the other was missing both arms. One plane had flown out yesterday, but a blizzard had come through since then, and it was impossible to land. The man with no arms told me with an absent look. The muffled moans were heard all around. Over and over again, an orderly crossed the runway, but overall, there was nothing he could do to help here. Being exhausted, I blacked out on my pile of snow and fell into a restless sleep. The frost soon woke me up, chattering my teeth. I looked around me. A Luftwaffe inspector was coming across the runway. I shouted to him and asked if there was any chance of flying away. He answered that 3 hours ago they had been informed by radio that 3 planes had taken off. They would drop some supplies, but whether they would land or not was not clear. I showed him my permission to leave. He shook his head and said that it was out of order. It needed the signature of Lieutenant General Otto Rinaldi, head of the Army Sanitary Service. "You should go and talk to him," he finished. "It's only 500 meters out here, over there in the ravine." Only 500 meters? Once again, a great effort. Each move was painful. Just the thought of it made me weak, and I slipped into a half-asleep state. Suddenly, I saw my house, my wife, and my daughter, and the faces of my fallen comrades behind them. Then, a Russian soldier ran up to me and hit me with his rifle. Overwhelmed by pain, I woke up. The Russian was the orderly who kicked my wounded leg. There were 3 of them, carrying stretchers. They must have had a task of removing the corpses from the runway. He just wanted to see if I was alive. No wonder, since my shrunken, bloodless face seemed more like a corpse's than a living man's. A short nap gave me some strength. I asked the orderlies to give me directions to the medical dugout, with intentions of reaching it. I pulled myself forward on the last breath. It felt like an eternity had passed before I was seated in front of the head of the sanitary service. I gave him a description of the occurrence and got his signature. "This moron might not have sent you here," he commented as he signed. "The signature of Army headquarters is sufficient." Then he sent me to a neighboring dugout. The doctor wanted to have my bandage changed, but I refused. A feeling of acute restlessness urged me to leave the warm dugout. After crawling out of the ravine vigorously, I returned to the airfield. I searched for the inspector and saw him not far from my snowdrift. "I had my papers in order now," he said. I thought I should be smarter and didn't call him a moron. Probably it saved my life. During our talk, the sound of the engines of several planes flying towards us was heard over the airfield. Could it be the Russians or our saviors? Everyone's eyes were drawn to the sky. All we could see were vague movements in the bright blanket of the sky. The signal lights were lit from below, and then they lowered down like giant birds of prey. They were German Henkel He 111, descending in big circles. Would they only drop down containers of supplies, or would they land to take a few of those poor wounded men? The blood was coursing violently through my arteries, and it was hot despite the cold. I unbuttoned the collar of my overcoat so that I could look more comfortably. All the effort and suffering of the previous days, weeks, and months were forgotten. Over there was salvation, the last chance to get home. Each of us was thinking the same thing deep inside, so it meant we weren't written off or forgotten. They wanted to give us a hand. Previously, there was the upsetting feeling of being forgotten. In an instant, it all changed. At first, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then, on the big airfield, there was a sudden turmoil, as in a ruined anthill. Those who could run, they ran. No one knew where they were running to. They all wanted to be where the plane would land. I also tried to stand up, but I fell down after the first attempt, overwhelmed by pain. Here I remained on my snowy hill and observed this meaningless madness. 2 planes touched the ground and rolled, loaded to the limit, to stop about 100 meters away from us. The third one kept circling. Like a river overflowing, everyone rushed to the 2 landed planes and swarmed over them like a black, agitated crowd. The boxes and crates were being unloaded from the fuselage of the plane. It was all being done with extreme speed. At any minute, the Russians were going to take the last runway. No one could stop them. All of a sudden, it became quiet. At the nearest airplane, a medic in the rank of an officer showed up and shouted in an unbelievably clear voice, "We take on board only seriously wounded men, and only 1 officer and 7 soldiers in each plane." For a moment, there was a dead silence, and then thousands of voices howled indignantly like a hurricane. Life or death now. Each wanted to be one of the 8 lucky ones to get on the plane. One pushed against the other. The swearing of the people being pushed back grew stronger. The screams of the people who were being trampled on echoed all over the runway. The officer watched this madness calmly. It seemed he was used to it. A shot sounded, and I heard his voice again. When he spoke, his back was turned to me. I did not catch what he said, but I saw how immediately some of the crowd backed away from the plane without a word, dropping to their knees where they stood. The other medical officers were picking out from the crowd the ones to be loaded. Having completely forgotten myself, I sat on my pile of snow. After weeks of half sleep, this pulsating life had completely exhausted me. Before I realized that my salvation would never happen, a dense current of air almost blew me out of my seat. In terror, I looked around, and only a few feet away from me I saw a third plane. It rolled up close behind me. The huge propeller almost cut me down. Numb with fear, I sat there motionless. There were hundreds of people running from all sides in my direction. If there was any chance of escape, this was it. The crowds were colliding, falling, some trampling on others. The fact that I did not suffer the same fate was only thanks to the terrifying, still spinning propellers. But the field gendarmes were now holding back the pressure. Everything was slowly calming down. The packages and containers were thrown out of the plane right onto the frozen ground. None of the starving soldiers even looked at this priceless foodstuff. Everyone was anxiously waiting for the loading. The officer who was in charge of it climbed up on the wing. In the silence that followed, I heard, almost over my head, the fateful words, "1 officer, 7 soldiers." And that was it. The moment he turned around to step off the wing, I recognized him as my inspector, the man who had sent me on that mad chase for the head of the sanitary service, and he recognized me. With an inviting gesture, he shouted, "Ah, there you are, over here." And, turning around again, he added in a matter-of-fact manner, "And 7 soldiers." For a second, I was stunned. I must have sat on my snow chair, but only for a second, because then I stood up, grasped the wing, and made my way to the cargo hold. I watched as the people standing around me silently stepped aside and the crowd let me pass. My body collapsed in pain. I was being carried onto the plane. The noise surrounding me turned into a happy shout. I blacked out. It must have been only for a few short minutes, because when I came to, I heard the inspector counting 5. That meant 5 men had already been loaded. 6. 7. A pause. Someone shouted, "Sit tighter!" and they started counting again. We pushed ourselves into each other. 12, I heard, and then 13, 14, 15. That was all. The steel doors were closed with a tug. There was only room for 8, and they had taken 15 men on board. 15 men were rescued from the hell of Stalingrad. The thousands were left behind. We could feel through the steel walls the eyes of those desperate comrades focused on us. Give our regards to the homeland. Those must have been their last thoughts. They didn't say anything. They didn't wave. They just turned around and they realized that their awful fate was sealed. We were heading for salvation. They were heading for years of deadly captivity. The powerful roar of the engines dragged us out of our thoughts before takeoff. Were we truly saved? The next few minutes would tell. The plane rolled around on the rough surface. The propellers were giving their maximum. We trembled with it with every fiber of our bodies. Then all of a sudden, the sound stopped abruptly. It seemed we were turning. The pilot repeated the maneuver. The rear window in the cabin opened, and he shouted into the compartment, "We're overloaded! Someone has to get out!" Our happy state of mind was blown away. Now we were faced with nothing but cold reality. Out? What is that supposed to mean? The young pilot stared at me with hope. I was the senior officer. I had to decide who would go out. No, I couldn't decide that. Which one of those men on board, the ones that had just been rescued, could I throw away to a pointless death? Shaking my head, I looked at the pilot. The words came off my lips in a dry voice. No one leaves the plane. I heard the sighs of relief from the men sitting next to me. I felt that everyone here shared the same feeling, despite the fact that not a word of approval or disagreement had been spoken. The pilot was sweating. He looked as if he intended to protest, but he turned back to the dashboard when he caught sight of all those determined faces. His comrade in the cockpit must have said to him, "Try again." And he tried. I suppose there are not many times when 15 men have prayed so earnestly to their God as we did during those crucial moments. The engines roared again, chanting their formidable song. Along the snowy tracks of the other two planes, the dull gray-colored monster rolled down the runway with power. I felt a sudden, indescribable feeling of pressure in my stomach. The plane was getting off the ground. It gained altitude slowly, circled the field a few times, then took a turn to the southwest. What was beneath us? Was it the gray lines of comrades we had left behind? No, it was the soldiers in brown uniforms. The Russians were taking the airfield. A few more minutes there, and we wouldn't have escaped in time. We realized only at that moment the seriousness of the situation. It was truly a last-minute salvation from the claws of death. We could see the Russians for a few seconds longer, and then the cloud covered us with its life-saving veil. That's all for today. I hope your soldiers will not have to escape from the battlefield like that. After all, using your unique strategy in Conflict of Nations, you can avoid the mistakes of past years and conquer the world in epic battles. By following the link in the description of the video, you will receive an exclusive gift, 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. The offer is valid only for 30 days. Don't waste time. Follow the link right now, as this gift will greatly help you in realizing your grand plans.